Ole Miss is in a transformational period, and Lane Kiffin is trying to will us through the door. We'll talk about how this is going, some stuff we can get better with, and talk about the future of the talent of the Ole Miss football program. Plus, we break down Jeffery Rush, and we also have our Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets preview. Should be a pretty good show. Stick around.
You are Locked On Ole Miss, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcast, including YouTube. Please subscribe there. Also, we're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, or more importantly, Ole Miss every day. Hi, I'm Stephen Willis. I hope everybody had a good 4th of July celebration. I hope everybody was safe. But this is the Locked On Ole Miss podcast, Wednesday edition, and we have a chock full show. We're going to talk about the mindset of Ole Miss football. We got a Georgia Tech preview ahead, and we show video of Jeffery Rush as well. It's kind of long overdue, but he kind of committed before we started showing video, so we can go back and get him as well. As we start counting down to SEC Media Days, which is about 2 weeks away, we're pretty fired up about that. Anyway, Lane Kiffin is working desperately to change the mindset of Ole Miss's football fans, of Ole Miss's athletic department, of everything inside of Ole Miss. Lane Kiffin is actively trying to change that. Right now, we have potentially the most talented roster that Ole Miss has ever had, but you wouldn't know that if you talk to people in the fan base. They talk about where they're missing and stuff they still need. And the same old conversations that people have had for 20 years, they're having those now. And this isn't Lane's fault. This isn't the fans' fault. It's just a tradition of the way that you talk about certain issues. Now, the avenues that Lane Kiffin is having to go to get players and to increase the talent pool of the roster is a little bit unprecedented, and the transfer portal plays a huge part in it. So much so that he anointed himself as the portal king in 2022. This was, I think it was shortly after Michael Trigg and Jackson Dart committed to Ole Miss. So you need to understand as Ole Miss fans that there aren't like wins and losses and things like that. Even when you miss out on a player within the transfer portal and in recruiting, there's 5 other players that fit that need. There is no true loss. There is no true win. You're excited when you get them, but understand that there are groups of players and clusters of players at positions on the Ole Miss board at the moment. One thing they talked about, Mark Schlabach, everybody jumped on this Portal King idea in 2022 and talked about how Lane Kiffin had, and even fewer have had more success in the transfer portal than the Ole Miss Rebels coach. So after landing USC quarterback Jackson Dart and tight end Michael Trigg over the weekend, it was a little surprised that Kiffin went to Twitter on Monday to declare himself the Portal King. And we still see that. Honestly, little inside baseball, whenever I put Portal King in a video, it has probably 100 to 200 more views than if I don't. People say I harp on stuff too much times. That's because they don't realize whenever I don't harp on it, the videos don't do as well as when I do. I know it gets on people's nerves from time to time, and people might get fed up about it, and they might say that I am being repetitive from time to time. But that doesn't change the fact that people watch it when I talk about it. And the Portal King is one of those topics that I can talk about. I can pretty much go to and guarantee 1,500 views on that video. We're at the point where I can guarantee about 1,000 views on a video of the Locked On Ole Miss podcast. But if I add Portal King, I can guarantee 1,500 views. It's the weirdest thing. And Lane Kiffin has built this brand. And Ole Miss fans have embraced this brand to the point where, to prove it wasn't a flash in the pan, he did it again this year. Only Kiffin, a.k.a. the Portal King, would sign highly regarded transfers from USC, starting for a season, only to dip into the portal again to sign not one but two more highly regarded quarterback transfers a few weeks after the season ended. So this is all built in for roster transformations. Now, there is no minimum standard for signings or maximum standard that you can have in a year. So the transfer portal, if you have a player go out, you have another player that can come in. That's the way this works. So last year and the year before, there might have been limits of what you can do as far as the signing period. Not so much last year, but not this year at all. 2 years ago, you absolutely did. There was maximum limits of players that could sign. They did away with that with temporary waivers. So you're seeing now an uptick in the high school football class to go along with the transfer portal. Now, many people are talking about how that is Lane Kiffin just putting down roots and starting to do something more familiar. And I don't agree with that. I genuinely don't agree with that. I think Lane Kiffin wants the best players available. And he doesn't care if that is a 3-star player in Louisiana, if it is a 5-star player in Mississippi, or if it's a transfer from West Virginia. He wants to find the best 85 players to fill this roster. And to the point where you can look at it and it's like, hey, does Ole Miss have the best quarterback room in the country? That's not even a question we could ask previous to this. The last time we had a quarterback room this stacked, Glenn Griffin and those were in the perfect season era of 1962, where they were roaming the halls. Ole Miss has the best running back in the country. He was a 3-star running back out of Pike Road, something in Alabama. I apologize about the high school name. I just, brain surgery moment. But they've also added the best player of the last year in the state of Mississippi, a consensus 5-star plus type player, recruited that high schooler to their roster. So this is what I think is happening. Okay? Lane Kiffin is trying to build this roster up. And he has a through line that he does. And players either go above it or below it. If they're above it, Lane Kiffin will recruit it. If they're below it, he won't. And he doesn't care if they're a high school 4-star, if they are a transfer portal superstar. If you can't fit on that chart exactly where he's put you, he's not going to recruit you. And Ole Miss fans need to do their part as well, okay? It's not just about Lane Kiffin, because Lane Kiffin is by force of will trying to get the Ole Miss fan base into the next century and get them out of those old habits that die so hard, those little Ole Miss, or this player is not good. We need to compete with this other school. And any situation where that player commits, you need to be either really up or really down about. And you can't do that. This roster is about constructing the best 85 players, and it is never done. Even if you get a player, even if you win a big deal, like William Eccles just committed over the weekend, huge big deal type thing. I've heard stories that some people think he might be the best player in the state of Mississippi. You can't celebrate overly that commitment, because there are 84 other players that you need to find as well. And you're always trying to get them. And if somebody else commits to another school, you're going to keep recruiting them unless you don't, which is a red flag for that player anyway. And you probably shouldn't have been recruiting them to start with. But that 85 and that talent that you're building in your roster can actually compete to the point where Ole Miss needs to start fighting for conference championships and SEC championship game appearances. They've done Sugar Bowls, 2 Sugar Bowls in 10 years. That is a good step for this Ole Miss program. But it is important that Ole Miss fans do not get into the little Ole Miss mindset. People need Ole Miss to get in the little Ole Miss mindset. And this isn't saying about unrealistic expectations. This is just about pigeonholing you and putting you in a box in the era of when college football is completely changing. Schools like Boise State, okay? For people that want to do the little Ole Miss thing, people like Boise State, through their use of the rules, their advent of RPOs and package type plays were able to become a major force in the mid-2000s. It wasn't because of their athletic budget. It wasn't necessarily because of their coach. It was because they were doing something that somebody else wasn't. And Ole Miss Fans kind of needs to get out of the way because they have a coach that is an early adopter. And if you let him work and let him do what he needs to do, he will take you where you want to go as long as he is here. People look at the end of last season and think that was some sort of a failure at the end of the last year. I view the end of last year as sabotage more than of a lack of talent issue. The Alabama game was probably more of an indicator of where Ole Miss football was, but that Arkansas game, all of that stuff went on through that week and the Mississippi State week. It affected practices. All of those games in the last three kind of stood out. So we will see exactly how they operate once the season starts. And we're doing our wins and losses. You know, today is the Georgia Tech preview. We're going to talk about that. But this Ole Miss fan base, they're being pulled almost kicking and screaming into the 21st century. Lane Kiffin, through sheer force of will, is trying to get Ole Miss into a position where they modernize college football in the state of Mississippi. And to do that, it doesn't matter what other people do. It's truly a take care of yourself moment. And the talent and the coaching and everything that's in position, if we take care of it, results will come. Now, I'm going to put this up real quick while I'm talking at the moment. And I do want to let you know the Grove Collective, this is the address for the Grove Collective. You can sign up for that. Now, if you are looking at a way that you can help, they have a subscription program of $20 a month. And you can actually participate in the acquisition of talent and making sure those players are taken care of. Walker Jones does a tremendous job. He is a leader in this program. He's talked to Congress. As far as collectives go, there's not many people that you could have better position than Walker Jones to be a collective leader. So go to thegrovecollective.com, sign up for a subscription service, and help Ole Miss's NIL program if you don't mind. All right, I do want to let you know that today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. And take a swing at betting in MLB on FanDuel and get 10 times your first bet amount in bonus bets, up to $200. That's right, just $20 and you'll land $200 back in bonus bet, win or lose. That's $200 you can spend on everything from the money line to the over-under to who you think is going to hit the first home run. It's all on an app that is super secure and easy to use. And plus, when you win, you get paid instantly. Yes, I realize that Mississippi is a brick and mortar casino state where if you want to gamble on sports gambling issues, you have to go to a casino. But if you are in Tennessee or in Louisiana, you can take advantage of the FanDuel Sports app as well. New Orleans, if you go down for the Tulane game, Baton Rouge, Shreveport, Delta, Louisiana, you can hit it up there. If you're in Tennessee, you can Memphis, Jackson, Nashville, Tennessee, Gatlinburg, Tennessee, you can use the FanDuel Sportsbook app. So sign up today and visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get $200 back in bonus bets. So that's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, an official partner of Major League Baseball. That is pretty cool indeed. And I'm pretty fired up about what's going on with the FanDuel Sports app. And whenever football season finally gets here, which, by the way, 2 months from right now, we will be inside football season. And we are going to do things where we do the odds. We have a whole show lineup to where game week, we handle game week, I think, better than anybody else. I love what we do. I love how we do it. But if you want to follow and talk about Ole Miss football and pay attention to fun stuff that you can really sink your teeth into, join us there. Anyway, thanks for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcast, including YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Everydayers, tonight on the show, Pratt Rogers. And we are going to talk some buy and sell. We're going to do a bunch of stuff with recruits in the Ole Miss system. We're going to talk about that. So join that as well. your team every day, or more importantly, Ole Miss every day. All right. Now, one thing that we need to look at is Jeffery Rush. Now, we started doing this after Jeffery Rush committed, so Jeffery Rush didn't get a segment. And the Ole Miss fan base, a lot of people don't know about this player. Now, Jeffery Rush is a top shelf profile type player. There he is. On the On3 consensus, he is 184. He is the 22nd rated defensive lineman in the country. He's the 6th rated player in the state of Mississippi. On 247, he is the 57th player in the country. In ESPN, he is 134. Rivals is just a 4-star, and On3 is just a 3-star. I don't know what to think about that. Now, one thing that you need to take into mind, okay, one thing you need to take care of, and one thing you need to think of is with Jeffery Rush, he is a defensive end and a solid edge player out of Pascagoula. Jamonte Waller is going to get a ton of pub. He just is. Kamarion Franklin is going to get a ton of pub. And Ole Miss is going to try like heck to get Kamarion Franklin for sure, maybe both of them. But I don't think people need to sleep on Jeffery Rush, okay? When you look at his highlights, you're dealing with somebody that he's pretty impressive off the ball, off the line of scrimmage, and his get off is pretty top shelf. And he's able to rush the passer. Now, one thing that I was wondering about, whenever you look at this defensive line that Ole Miss is kind of piecing together through the high school ranks, is Jeffery Rush a quick twitch jack type player, or is he more of a Marcus Tillman type defensive lineman, using somebody from when I was at Ole Miss that Ole Miss can kind of lean on? Somebody that is a heavy workload, a solid defensive end, really good football player, but not that really twitchy Greg Hardy type. And the more I watch him, there's plays that are made. His get off is really good. He is a very twitchy athlete. And essentially, to quote Brian Smith, the Locked On recruiting guy, this guy's a hoss. This is a guy that plays in the backfield more times than not. He's a guy that affects the quarterback every time he snaps the football. He has to be accounted for. Now, we will see what he will look like once he lines up against SEC level offensive linemen. Will he be that same twitchy guy? Or will he be more that stable guy? So it'll be really interesting to see exactly how that goes. Anyway, this is not surprising. I say this on most every commitment that Ole Miss gets, but I really like this player. I think he is going to provide a little bit of an avenue that helps Ole Miss on the defensive line moving forward. Right now, on the defensive line, you have Jeffery Rush, defensive end, solid, absolutely solid. Cameron Beavers, defensive lineman out of Bay Springs, solid, really solid. And then you have William Eccles, who some people claim could be the best player in the college football, or in the SEC in state of Mississippi. Sorry about that. And they're also still recruiting Kamarion Franklin. If you get that 4, you have completely in one class remade your defensive line, and I don't care what anybody says, that class is a win. It doesn't matter what you do elsewhere. That class is a win, because you have made SEC quality players available across your defensive line. The defensive line is going to get better, and all of a sudden, that team that we're hoping defensively just gets the ball back, just takes the ball away. All of a sudden, the defense is making real plays and gives the offense that comfort and that security blanket that they need. Pretty good. Anyway, when we come back, we have a Georgia Tech Yellow Jacket preview. Stick around on Ole Miss Podcast. Today, we're going to start talking about Georgia Tech. It's a game that I think Ole Miss won 42-0, and it was a pure steamrolling at Bobby Dodd Stadium in 2022. Now, this is a game that, if you look in my library, if you go back to last summer, we talked about Ole Miss playing Georgia Tech and why Georgia Tech is not in the SEC right now, because they tried to get Georgia Tech in the SEC, but Ole Miss and Mississippi State was against it because there was a rivalry that developed between John Howard Vaught and Bobby Dodd in the 1940s and 50s. It led to Georgia Tech, once they got out of the SEC, basically Ole Miss and Mississippi State saying no take backsies. So go back and check that video out as well. But this game has a chance to be pretty interesting because they've changed some stuff that is pretty interesting as well. Now, they went 5-7 last year and 4-4 in the SEC, which shocks me as bad as that team was at the beginning of the year. Brent Key has got hired as the head coach. Buster Faulkner is the new offensive coordinator. The reason I mention that is he is a cousin of Corey Burton, who is my partner in crime on SEC After Dark. Says it's been totally forgotten over the last 4 years and most of the last 6. But Georgia Tech is supposed to win college football games. It's so great whenever they say that. I love that lead. Now, the key to the season is, according to this, is to find the running game. They have crazy, weird records when they don't rush for 150 yards in the game. So in Ole Miss's defense, Pete Golding has his work cut out for it, because if they don't rush for 150 yards, they don't win the game. Now, some of that is the fact that Paul Johnson was so run heavy. And basically, if you held that triple option offense under 150 yards, they weren't beating you. But if you go back to 2006, they're 1-36 when failing to get to 150 rushing yards. So that is pretty interesting as well. Now, if you look at the best transfers that they had them up earlier, but they got a linebacker in from Minnesota. Jeff Sims has moved to Nebraska. That's an interesting situation with the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets. Now, we are going to talk a little bit about how that Georgia Tech could be an effective unit against Ole Miss, because I do worry that Ole Miss, after they just completely demolished Georgia Tech in Atlanta last season, there might be a little bit of a hangover. And I do think whenever you look at it, it's Mercer, it's at Tulane, it is Georgia Tech at home, and then it's at Alabama. The trap game in that scenario is Georgia Tech, because everybody is going to point to the road game at New Orleans against Tulane. Everybody is going to point at the road game at Tuscaloosa, at Alabama. That Georgia Tech is just kind of there. So the potential is there for this to be a much more difficult game than the Tulane game was, and much more difficult than anybody should give it credit for. Now, early in the season, like I said, they've lost Jeff Sims. I think Zach Pyron is the quarterback coming back. He's going to compete with Haynes King, the transfer from Texas A&M. We all know about Haynes. That position will be a key position on the field, because without quarterback play in modern college football, we can know that it is going to be a struggle for whoever is going up against anybody. It just is. But that is something you need to pay attention to. You need to pay attention on where they sit on Ole Miss's schedule, the game before and the game after. Georgia Tech is the sandwich game with Power 5 athletes to where it could be dangerous. Think Tulsa last year, but with Power 5 athletes. That's what could happen in Vaught-Hemingway before they go off to Alabama. And second of all, you could have a situation where Brent Key has this team just plucky to where they want to go, where they want to play football at a very high level. They're kind of jazzed up about this game. They're ready to go. It's early in the season. Now, if you look at their games that they have, they open the season conference game September 1st. I believe that is a Friday, against Louisville. The following Saturday, they have a tune-up game against South Carolina State. Then they come to Oxford. Then they have Wake Forest. So they get into it in a hurry. They just do. Now, if you want to look at the FPI from ESPN, ESPN is saying that Ole Miss has an 89.2 chance of winning the game and a 10.8% chance of losing the game. There's obviously not a very high probability with Ole Miss. Now, I do think, looking at Ole Miss's schedule and wins and losses, I think Ole Miss wins Mercer at Tulane, and I think they're going to beat Georgia Tech. If they don't, it's a problem. If Ole Miss starts anything but 3-0, it's a problem going into this season. If you're looking for something to point at it, everything is going wrong, it is probably that they're starting something other than 3-0. After this game and starting tomorrow, we're going to start talking about Alabama. We're going to start talking about LSU. SEC games begin tomorrow from this list. But Ole Miss starting 3-0, going to Alabama. That game is probably on CBS. That game is probably viewed at by a ton of people as an exciting type game for the Ole Miss Rebels. I'm expecting a CBS type game, 2:30 in the afternoon at Alabama. Lane Kiffin probably shouldn't say get your popcorn ready, but that is absolutely something that we need to do. We need to get that popcorn ready, honestly. So that is what I think we're going to do through 3 games. I do think 3-0, the preview, that is more than attainable. Now it gets real, and now is going to determine how Ole Miss can move forward. Now, I'm looking at this, and I'm like, hey, Ole Miss is probably going to win a game that they're not supposed to win, and they're probably going to lose one that they are. And whenever you look at how this season goes out, that is going to happen. So I'm going to try and guess how that happens. But I do think Ole Miss will be in a very good shape after 3 games going to Tuscaloosa, and Jackson Dart and all of this team will be in really good shape, because we're not going to get into the breakdown right now, but Alabama's looking at a new quarterback. Will Anderson is gone, new defensive coordinator, new offensive coordinator, new positions all over the field. The offense is going to look completely different. The defense is going to look completely different. All of this is coming together for a September game with the Ole Miss Rebels against somebody that has been a top 10 offense in the country over the last year. I'm already excited about talking about the Ole Miss Alabama game. So I'll be happy to talk about that tomorrow as well. Tonight on the show, Pratt Rogers is going to talk. We're going to do a little buy and sell in the recruiting game. Tune in for that. But I do want to thank everybody for tuning in and making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcast, including YouTube. Subscribe there. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I have my shirt on and everything. I've been partying and having a good time on the 4th of July when I recorded this. Hope everybody enjoys it. Tune in for a little bit more normal shows moving forward. Anyway, take care. We'll see you tomorrow.